She must have wandered in from the street.
She's ruining the atmosphere.
It was Christmas Eve, and the luxury restaurant sparkled like a palace. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, waiters in polished uniforms moved swiftly between tables, and laughter rose like music from the wealthy guests who gathered there. Everyone seemed to fit perfectly into this picture of elegance, until the doors opened, and silence fell. A homeless black woman stepped inside. Her clothes were worn, her shoes frayed, and her presence drew every eye in the room. At first, there was shock, then came the laughter. Some chuckled behind their hands, others laughed openly. To them, her very existence in such a place was a joke. They couldn't imagine what she was doing there, or why she would dare enter a world so far from her own. But what none of them knew was that the truth she carried would soon shake every person in that room, and leave them questioning everything they thought they understood about wealth, dignity, and humanity. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that challenges the way we see the world. The woman's name was Amara. Once, she had lived a life not so different from those around her. She had a small home, a loving family, and dreams she chased with every ounce of her strength. But life had a way of unraveling even the strongest threads. Illness had struck her husband, medical bills had piled high, and despite her determination, everything had slipped through her fingers. First their savings, then their home, and finally, the security that most of the guests in that restaurant took for granted. Now, she walked the streets with only memories to keep her warm, searching through trash bins for scraps of food, trying to survive another day. To the world, she was invisible, someone people passed without seeing, someone mocked as lazy or undeserving. But tonight, she was tired of invisibility. Tonight, she chose to walk through the very doors of a place that symbolized everything she had lost, not to beg for pity, but to remind herself, and everyone inside, that dignity could not be stripped away by circumstance. The restaurant was alive with glittering lights and laughter when she entered. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Silverware clinked against porcelain, then stopped. Guests turned in unison, their perfectly polished faces breaking into sneers and smirks. A woman in pearls leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Can you believe this? She must have wandered in from the street." Another man chuckled, shaking his head. "She's ruining the atmosphere. Someone should escort her out before she embarrasses herself further." But Amara didn't flinch. She walked slowly, her steps echoing across the marble floor. Each footstep was a quiet defiance, a declaration that she would not be erased by their laughter. She carried herself with grace, her head lifted, her eyes steady. She was out of place, yes, but she was also unforgettable. At the far end of the room sat Mr. Langford, a powerful millionaire known for his ruthless dealings and arrogance. He sipped his wine, watching with amusement. "Let her come," he said loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "This should be entertaining." His words silenced the murmurs but fueled the laughter. To him, Amara was nothing more than a performance, a distraction to pass the evening. Finally, she reached an empty table near the center of the room. Gasps followed her as she pulled out a chair and sat down, calm and composed. A young waiter, nervous and uncertain, approached her. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice low, "do you have a reservation?" His eyes flicked nervously to the manager, who gestured impatiently from across the room. Amara looked up at him, her tired eyes steady and unwavering. "No," she said softly but firmly. "But I have something far more important." The laughter swelled again. Mr. Langford clapped his hands mockingly. "Far more important? What could that be?" Amara let the silence stretch, her presence demanding that they wait for her words. Finally, she spoke. "The truth." The laughter faltered. Guests glanced at one another, uncertain, unsettled. What could a homeless woman mean by such a statement? Mr. Langford leaned forward, smirking. And what truth do you carry, dressed in rags, that we don't already know? Amara's voice was calm but sharp, cutting through the room. The truth that wealth does not make you noble. The truth that privilege does not make you superior. And the truth that your laughter says more about you than it does about me. The room froze, her words hanging in the air heavier than any chandelier. Some shifted in their chairs, suddenly aware of the cruelty behind their laughter. Others rolled their eyes, unwilling to accept a truth that threatened their pride. But Amara was not finished. She stood, her voice gaining strength with every syllable. You see rags, you see poverty, and you believe you know my story. But you know nothing of me. You don't know the battles I've fought, the losses I've endured, or the strength it takes to keep walking when the world wants you invisible. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. A few looked away, frowning, trying to dismiss her. At the largest table, Mr. Langford smirked, clinging to his authority. Nice speech, he said with a mocking smile, but this is still a place for those who can pay. Can you? Whispers rippled across the room. For many, the question was the final proof that Amara did not belong. But Amara reached into her coat pocket, her hand trembling slightly, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her voice was steady as she held it high. This, she said, is a letter from the owner of this restaurant. The guests gasped. Even the waiters exchanged startled glances. She placed the letter on the table, and a waiter read it aloud, his voice shaking. It was a promise from the founder himself: if you ever find yourself in need, my doors will always be open to you. This restaurant was built not only for the wealthy, but to honor those whose strength inspires us all. The whispers grew louder, some gasping, some frowning, others clearly shaken. She had once worked here, she explained, cleaning tables, polishing glasses, carrying trays. She had helped build the very foundation of the place they now glorified. And though life had taken much from her, this letter proved she was remembered not as a beggar, but as a woman of dignity. Mr. Langford scoffed, his arrogance faltering but still intact. So what? A piece of paper doesn't change your rags. It doesn't buy you a seat here tonight. Amara looked straight at him, her eyes sharp with fire. No. What buys me a seat is not paper or money, it is truth. And truth will outlast every fortune in this room. The tension snapped like a tightened wire. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, others stared at her with newfound respect. Then, in a moment that would mark the turning point of the night, a young waiter stepped forward. He set a plate in front of her and said clearly, "Dinner is served." The air grew electric. A few mouths fell open in shock. It was not just food, it was defiance. It was recognition. And in that small act, the balance of power shifted. Another waiter brought her water. Another lit the candle on her table. One by one, the staff silently declared their solidarity. Mr. Langford slammed his glass down, his face red with rage. This is madness. You let her sit here, and this place loses all its worth. If a beggar belongs here, then no one does. His words rang hollow, desperation leaking from every syllable. But no one laughed this time. No one cheered him on. The very people who had mocked Amara now sat silently, ashamed, unable to look her in the eye. Their laughter had turned into silence, their superiority stripped away by the undeniable presence of a woman they had dismissed as nothing. Amara lifted her fork, not arrogantly, but calmly. She took her first bite, and then spoke. Respect cannot be bought. It must be earned. And tonight, it is not your money that holds this room, it is my story, my survival, and the reminder that dignity does not vanish with poverty. The chandeliers glowed above them, but it was her voice that illuminated the room. The silence in the restaurant deepened, broken only by the soft clinking of Amara's fork against her plate. For the first time that night, people were not looking at their menus, or their wine glasses, or their designer watches, they were looking at her. The woman they had laughed at. The woman they had called worthless. The woman who now held the entire room in the palm of her hand. One guest, a middle-aged woman in pearls, finally whispered, "I'm sorry." It was quiet, but others heard it, and soon more voices followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. "We were wrong. Forgive us. We didn't know." Each apology seemed to weigh heavily in the air, as if spoken not just for Amara, but for every invisible soul the world had ignored. Amara listened, her face calm, her eyes reflecting a depth of pain and resilience that words could not capture. She nodded once, but she did not rise to accept or reject their apologies. Instead, she continued eating with quiet dignity, showing them that her worth did not depend on their approval. Mr. Langford, however, sat stiff, his pride collapsing but his stubbornness refusing to die. He tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow, brittle. No one joined him. The power he had wielded with his wealth was gone, crumbling like ash in the presence of a truth the restaurant owner himself appeared. An older man with silver hair and kind eyes, he stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Amara. The room parted as he walked toward her, and when he reached her table, he bent down and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Amara," he said softly, his voice filled with both surprise and pride, "I never thought I'd see you again. You helped me build this place. You gave me your strength when I had nothing. This restaurant will always be your home." Gasps echoed through the room. The truth was undeniable now. She wasn't just a homeless woman who had wandered in, she was part of the foundation, a piece of its very story. The guests who had mocked her felt their arrogance dissolve into shame, realizing they had measured worth by wealth when true worth was standing right before them, unbroken by their cruelty. Amara's lips trembled, but she did not cry. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and the owner squeezed her shoulder gently. Then, turning to the room, he said firmly, "Let tonight be a reminder. No amount of money can outweigh respect. You are not better than another because of what you wear or what you own. This woman has more honor in her heart than gold in any vault." A hush swept over the restaurant. Some guests wiped away tears. Others bowed their heads, unable to meet her gaze. The waiters stood taller, proud to serve a woman who had earned their respect not with wealth, but with truth. Amara finished her meal slowly, savoring every bite, not because of the food, but because of the moment. She had entered as an object of ridicule, but she was leaving as a force that none of them would ever forget. When she finally stood, the entire restaurant rose with her. Not a mockery, not a laugh, but an ovation, soft at first, then thunderous, filling the room with the sound of redemption. As she walked out into the cold night, the stars above seemed brighter. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her steps firm and steady. For the first time in a long time, she felt not invisible, but seen. Not broken, but whole. And those who had laughed at her would remember that night for the rest of their lives, not because they mocked her, but because she revealed the truth that silenced their cruelty and reminded them of what real dignity looked like.